Ask yourself, what happens when you combine some of the most brutal and torturous weapons in Elden Ring and have it so that the build you use makes it the optimal build for both weapons at the same time? In his quest to become the most powerful knight to ever exist, the vagabond somehow died due to mysterious circumstances, and one might think that's the end of the vagabond's adventures, right? The vagabond's dead, cold body laid around for days in the open world and nobody seemed to mind or notice. After a few days, however, a certain person busy with their own adventures and quests, known to have the ability to heal and resurrect the dead, fortunately enough for the vagabond crossed paths with his dead body. And this particular individual felt something that they never felt before when seeing the vagabond's helpless body laying there on the ground. A feeling that can only be described somewhere along the lines of feeling that a lot of potential was wasted. And even though they never met before, the mysterious individual felt a strong connection somehow and had this deeply ingrained sense of duty to make sure to bring the vagabond back to life. Because he knew the vagabond was not done yet in this world. So he did, and the rest is history. After the ritual of resurrecting the vagabond was completed, the vagabond arose like never before with new powers and now stronger than ever, but this time he was different. The vagabond was no longer a simple knight that was banished from his homeland trying to survive in a world ridden with evil. This new knight was consumed by hatred and all his reasoning and thought processes were gone. The knight only had one thing on his mind and one thing only: vengeance, and to brutally murder everything and everyone. The vagabond died, but came back as the Death Knight. So what the Death Knight did next immediately after his resurrection is travel across the lands in his quest to find some of the biggest and most brutal weapons in existence. Not only to defeat his opponents in combat quickly, but to do so in a way that maximizes the inflicted pain upon them before they die. The Death Knight is the evolved and late game version of my Vagabond Get OP early video, which is the most powerful strength and dexterity mix build that you can make at the start of the game. Make sure to check that video out as well if you haven't yet, because it's definitely something you'll want to watch as well. But now that we're in the mid and late game, a lot of options have been added to the possibilities for a strength and dexterity build. Bloodhound Fang from the early game is still very good in the late game, and I went into the why with great detail in part 1, so that is definitely still a very viable option. But my late game build will revolve around 2 strength and dexterity weapons that are absolutely insane as well, not just in power but also in design. Not only that, but these weapons are actually colossal weapons, meaning they are some of the biggest and hardest hitting weapons in the game in general, just from a raw damage perspective. Now for the first weapon that you'll want to pick up, you'll want to go to Mount Gelmir, exactly here on the map, and there's a grace close by, so that is nice. Now to get the weapon you will unfortunately have to kill the full-grown Fallingstar Beast that is unfortunately at this location. This beast is definitely within the top 5 most annoying enemies, but wait, before you throw your controller through the screen, a really nice tip to have a much easier time with this guy is if you just use a tanky spirit ash, such as the Great Shield Soldier Ashes. These ashes are the GOAT. They will do a great job of making this particular fight a lot easier when you're a physical damage build, since this guy has very high physical damage resistances and is immune to bleed as well. Nobody likes you, bro. After killing him, however, you will be rewarded with the Fallingstar Beast Jaw weapon, and this weapon is an absolute monster, and you'll see why in a second. But before we go over that weapon, we don't have time to waste. We want to get our second weapon as well, and thankfully this weapon is close by, actually, very close. It is in Volcano Manor itself, in the upper floors to be precise. You will get invaded by Inquisitor Ghiza when you get there, and even though he is pretty weak overall, and you can just slap him around like the little bitch he is with your Fallingstar Beast Jaw, especially if you upgrade it right from the bat, he does wield one of the most cruel weapons in the game in his hands, and that is now yours. This weapon is the definition of torture itself, exactly what the Death Knight longs for. Now add 1+1 and you'll now know what the setup will revolve around. Fallingstar Beast Jaw in your main hand and Ghiza wheel in your offhand. Before we get into the combat and Ashes of Wars and all that good stuff, let's first take a look at why these two weapons combined make up for an amazing build. Now, like I said before, both of these weapons are colossal weapons. So if you use them together, you can power stance them and have the nice power stance moveset of colossal weapons. Since these weapons are colossal weapons and thus have high AR, all the power stance attacks are going to hit like a truck. Next to the fact that they deal good poise damage as well, so you can just stance break your opponents by just power stancing your attacks quite fast. And that is definitely not all, because Fallingstar Beast Jaw is actually the colossal weapon with the longest range out of all the colossal weapons in the game. And not only colossal weapons, by the way, its range is one of the longest in the entire game. And Ghiza's wheel has the second longest range out of all the colossal weapons in the game. In other words, we have really nice range with very hard hitting weapons that we can power stance. Due to Fallingstar Beast Jaw's major range, we do want to use it in our main hand, so we can make good use of this weapon's normal and charged attack, in addition to using power stance attacks. That is a major reason for me personally why I want to use this weapon in our main hand, but the Ash of War plays a very important role in that decision as well, and I will go over the Ash of War in a second. Now, next to that, Ghiza's wheel has innate bloodless buildup, making it the only colossal weapon in the game that has innate bloodless buildup. This means that every few attacks that you attack your enemies with this weapon, you will proc bleed on your enemies, in addition to the crazy raw damage output that you're already doing anyways. And everybody knows that bleed is the most OP status effect in the game, and in this setup one of our weapons has exactly that status effect. Now consider everything I just said, combine it, and you'll see where I'm going and why this combination of weapons is so good. Ultimately, there is one piece to this build that makes this combination actually possible, and it's the scaling on the weapons. Both weapons are Strength and Dexterity hybrid weapons, or quality weapons. But not only that, if you data mine the scaling values for both weapons, you'll see that they have exactly the same scaling value. The value is equal for Strength and Dexterity on both weapons, and if you compare the weapons themselves, the values are exactly the same between the weapons themselves as well. And if you have no idea what I just said, then make sure to watch my video on scaling and stats. I'll put the link in the description and you'll know exactly what I mean with scaling values and data mining and all that stuff. But both these weapons have the exact same scaling modifiers and have exactly the same value for both Strength and Dexterity, on top of all the benefits related to the weapons that I just mentioned. And having exactly the same scaling values and distribution is great, because if we optimize our stats for one weapon, our other weapon will naturally also get optimized, and that is not something you frequently see when you have two completely different weapons that scale with multiple attributes. So to put these weapons together in one build is really nice. Long story short, we have two OP weapons from the same weapon class, allowing us to power stance them while having the longest range in their weapon class, and at the same time having all kinds of other benefits, while also having the exact same scaling values and distribution, making optimization through our stats very efficient. Now, I have personally always heard that you need very high levels to make a Strength and Dexterity build work, and otherwise it's just not viable. But in this video I will show you that that's not the case at all. Using two Strength and Dexterity weapons at the same time and having relatively low point investment into these stats, as you see here, you can still destroy the game completely, and all the footage in this video was recorded with these stats. We haven't even talked about the Ashes of Wars yet though, so let's do that right away as well. The Fallingstar Beast Jaw has Gravity Bolt as its Ash of War, and even though it feels a bit like a magical type of Ash of War, It scales primarily with our physical damage related stats, so strength and dexterity, while its scaling with intelligence is very low actually, which is great news for us since in this build we are really not interested in investing points into intelligence. Now with this SFR, you feel like you will always have control in really any situation. You can completely control an area just with the sheer damage of this SFR, but also with the speed that you can chain cast it. Add to that you can cast from quite a distance. It's a ranged SFR, making it even more OP. So you can just spam it safely and completely destroy any boss like that if you want, and it will work very well. The reason for this, in addition to the damage, range and speed, is the poise damage that comes with this SFR. You will stance break any boss or mob in the game within just a few casts of Gravity Bolt. While at the same time having the ability to do so from a range, and that is a very dangerous and lethal combination that a lot of weapons in the game do not actually have, and as you just saw, your opponents simply just do not have a chance against you like that. The match is over before you even enter combat. Every few hits their stance gets broken while their HP bar keeps shrinking, and it makes up for this loop that gives you complete control over them, and you can just keep doing so until they die, giving you a very easy way to destroy everything in the game. Now when you stance break your opponents, you can go for a few different options. First of all, obviously just keep spamming your Gravity Bolt as you will deal more damage in fact with it, and you get a few casts for free when your opponent is stance broken. Option 2 is to go for the critical hit, which is also a very nice option considering we are a physical damage build, so our critical hits will definitely pack a punch. Or you can go for the power stance attacks to get a lot of damage in that way as well, while the enemy is just sitting on the ground contemplating their life and you are just smacking the shit out of them. Or you can do a nice mixture of power stance attacks into critical hits to really min-max your damage output in the time frame you get. One final option, and this is one of my favorites, is to stance break your opponents with Gravity Bolt, then quickly two-hand your Ghiza's wheel and go full terror and become the psycho you always wanted to be and just mow down your enemy completely. Speaking of Ghiza's wheel, let's talk about that SFR as well. As you just saw, this SFR is the definition of crazy. Ghiza's wheel comes with spinning wheel, and spinning wheel is a really fun to use SFR. It's overall more situational than Gravity Bolt and can only be used in melee territory, so for that reason we do want to use Ghiza's wheel in our offhand. But don't get me wrong though, it is a very OP and nice SFR nonetheless, and it's so satisfying when you get to actually use it in its full capacity. This massive spinning thing of that hits your opponent a lot of times within a few seconds, and the individual hits themselves do not deal that much damage, but make sure to keep it on your opponent for a few seconds, because there are a lot of hits within those seconds and your opponent will just die as well that way. The damage over time is definitely a force to be reckoned with. But the SFR, just like the weapon itself, builds up bleed on your opponents as well. So keep it spinning on your opponents and you'll get a nice bleed proc that will deal massive damage in addition to the raw damage that you're dealing. Now it does take some time to wind up to actually start dealing damage with this SFR, but you do get some hyper armor when using this SFR. And with the poise in our build that I will go over in a second, we will not get interrupted so quickly and can often use this SFR for a good bit. That's also why I mentioned the combo with Gravity Bolt however. Because when your opponent is stance broken, you can spin the wheel and get a lot of damage and bleed buildup for free. So it's a very nice combo that just makes a lot of sense to do. And you can do it with my Death Knight build. Now we all know that feeling when you try to touch or grab something and you just can't reach it. It is very annoying. But thankfully the like button is right near your face. So make sure to hit that like button and subscribe as well if you haven't yet, or I will keep playing this clip for the next 69 hours. Now I did mention that this build works very well even with low stats, to disprove the claim saying you need really high levels to make a strength and dexterity build actually shine. All the combat footage you have seen so far were with a level 125 character with these stats, and as you see the levels aren't high at all and the build is very OP and powerful. So let's talk about stats. For a level 125 build we are on a very tight budget because we are running a hybrid build, power stancing some of the heaviest weapons in the game, so optimization is not an easy task at all, but everything is possible if you set your mind to it. First of all, you do need 20 intelligence to actually wield Fallingstar Beast Jaw, so get 20 intelligence to meet the requirements and don't worry about this stat anymore after that, since thankfully the weapon scales very badly with intelligence either way. It's really just a strength dexterity weapon with an intelligence requirement for some reason. Now as I showed you, strength and dexterity have exactly the same scaling, so you would maybe think that it really doesn't matter how you spread your points between these two stats, but that is not true because strength and dexterity have secondary effects that are unrelated to your physical damage output. In the case of dexterity, it's stuff like reducing your casting speed, which is nice for a mage type of build, but in this case it's not relevant. Strength's secondary effect, however, is very useful because it raises your physical defense, so we do want to prioritize strength at least until you reach the first soft cap of it. So for that purpose, get 45 strength and 30 dexterity, and with our flask of wondrous physic we will be able to reach the first soft cap on strength with a low level hybrid build like this, and that's going to be really nice. Now another thing why this build works well even with relatively low stats is because both our weapons are unique weapons that use somber smithing stones, and as you may or may not know, you can get the weapons that upgrade through somber smithing stones at least to +9 quite early on in the game, and somewhere in the mid game you can max them out and get both of them to +10, and these upgrades are much more important than the actual points in the stats in this case. Regarding the other stats, you definitely do want 40 vigor at least to reach the first soft cap and to get that tankiness going, and you want 39 endurance with this setup. Colossal weapons weigh a ton, so if you want to stay in the medium load category it is necessary to do so, and I have to admit it does feel really nice being in the medium load category, wielding not one but two colossal weapons and actually have good gear that I will go over in a second. In addition, you do get a lot of stamina, which is nice as well, since power stancing colossal weapons and attacking with them definitely takes a toll on your stamina. So all that stamina that you get will result into gameplay that is a lot smoother than what you would have with lower endurance levels. Finally, get some points into mind, just so we have some more comfort in casting our Ashes of Wars before we have to drink. 14 mind will give you 91 FP, which is exactly 7 gravity bolt casts before you have to drink, or 30 spinning wheel ticks, and that equates to a lot of damage on your opponents. And since we have so much control on the battlefield with this build, you do get a lot of time to just drink another flask in all tranquility if necessary. Now for a level 150 build, I would just get 60 vigor and then put 5 more points into dexterity. So then you are fully soft cap on vigor, making you incredibly tanky, which fits the idea I had for the Vagabond and the Death Knight, and then the points into dexterity for some additional damage. If you don't care about capping yourself, you could also say f it and get 80 strength, 80 dexterity, and let me know the results in the comments. If this build is already so OP right now, I shiver to think about what would happen if you do not limit yourself in any capacity, but it's definitely not necessary. As you just saw, you're already so OP at level 125 with this hybrid build, and that is definitely good news because it means that you can make this build relatively early on in your playthrough and start destroying everything with it. Now let's talk about gear, talismans, and our flask. For gear, you want to get the Knight's Cavalry Helm, the Knight's Cavalry Armor, Lionel Gauntlets, and the Scaled Greaves. Two reasons for this really: it is what the Dead Knight wears and makes him look badass, so from an aesthetic point of view, it is great. The Scaled Greaves also have this nice transition into the Knight's Cavalry armor with how it fades into the black color of the armor, so the combination fits well. Speaking in terms of functionality, however, this combination actually also puts us over 50 poise and gives us a bunch of defensive stats, which is really nice. Now this is one of those builds you definitely want to get 51 poise on at least to start resisting stance breaking hits. You will chain cast Gravity Bolt a lot, as well as cast Spinning Wheel, and when you do so, you will keep spinning the wheel and thus be stuck in the animation. And the last thing you want to happen in those moments is to get interrupted while casting your Spinning Wheel or your Gravity Bolt. And with the poise in our kit, we will have the possibility to prevent a lot of those stance breaking hits from happening to us. So having this amount of poise in our kit is really nice, and it's also a major factor in why I decided to make sure that we can actually run this type of gear while staying in the medium load category. For talismans, I really went with a more defensive approach with this build, as thematically it does fit the Death Knight, but it also just makes you have so much sustain on the battlefield. I do definitely recommend getting Alexander's Shard though for a offensive talisman, since the bonus to both our Ashes of Wars is really nice and noticeable, so definitely get that one. The Great Shard talisman helps us out greatly with giving us the tools to actually be able to still be in the medium load category while wearing heavy armor and use 2 colossal weapons at the same time. Then Earth 3 favorite +1 or +2 depending on if you're in the mid game or late game. It's just a nice talisman with our stats. It will give us more HP, and since we have really high endurance, we are going to profit a lot from the bonuses to stamina and equip load with this talisman as well. For the 4th talisman slot, there is quite some flexibility. I personally went with Dragon Crest Great Shield since it provides so much extra defense and nullifies a lot of the damage that you would otherwise take, but I would say that this slot is flexible. Some other options for offensive options are the Ritual Swords talisman, which is actually really good as well, since you get a significant bonus to your damage output, since you have the opportunity to just strike and control your opponents from a distance and thus manage to be at full HP consistently. Another option is the Spear talisman, which is also a nice option. It will boost the raw damage of our Fallingstar Beast Jaw, since its damage is considered pierce damage, so you can go that route as well. For the flask, it is simple, since our talismans and gear are quite on the defensive side of things. For our flask, we want to go offensive and get both the dexterity and strength node. This will give us 20 points in our main stats just from our flask, and that is really nice for a hybrid build like this. And in the case of strength, this will make it even possible to reach its first soft cap while still being relatively low level, utilizing our flask like this. And now you know everything you want to know about the Death Knight, from his combat style, weapons, strategy, to his equipment and gear that he uses to completely dominate the world and kill off everyone within mere seconds. I hope you enjoyed the video, and definitely try making your own Death Knight build, because this build is a lot of fun. Make sure to give the video a like if you liked it, subscribe and hit the bell thing so you're the first to get notified when I upload something, and let me know your thoughts in the comments.